Good morning and welcome to the Boston Herald Suffolk University Democratic Gubernatorial Debate, live from Studio 73 at Suffolk University. I'm Shelley Cohen, editorial page editor at the Boston Herald.
And I'm John Nucci, Vice President for Government and Community Affairs at Suffolk University.
And for the next 75 minutes, we're going to be asking questions of the five candidates here this morning. And we invite you to join us in doing that via Twitter using the hashtag MAGOV.
Please welcome the candidates. Dawn Berwick is a pediatrician, the founding CEO of the Institute for Healthcare Improvement and the former administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Steve Grossman has been state treasurer for 4 years and spent 35 years running a fourth-generation family business. Martha Coakley has served as Massachusetts Attorney General for the past 8 years and previously was Middlesex County District Attorney. Juliet Kayyem was Massachusetts' first Undersecretary for Homeland Security and is also the former Assistant Secretary for Intergovernmental Affairs with the United States Department of Homeland Security. Joe Avalone is a surgeon and a biotech executive.
Now, to describe the format, each candidate will get first crack at a question. Once that question is asked and answered, everyone else will have the opportunity to jump in to join the conversation, and we certainly hope you will do that. First question is to Treasurer Grossman. Every day in federal court, we've been subjected to tales of political patronage and the way it can corrupt a state agency, such as the probation department. Is patronage inherently evil, or is it a necessary part of making government work? And what would your policy be in dealing with it in your administration?
It's not so much what my policy would be, because I've got a track record on this issue. When I became treasurer and stood in front of the people of Massachusetts in January of 2011, I said two things. I said, first of all, every person we hire in the Treasury that I'm responsible for will be the best person we can hire for that job. We changed our hiring practices. We revolutionized our hiring practices, wrote a new manual, got rid of these letters and these phone calls. We don't take any phone calls. If Deval Patrick himself had called me and said, I've got a friend I'd like you to interview, I would have said, Governor, put it in writing. So we changed our practices dramatically, brought the kind of standards into hiring practices in Treasury, and those are exactly the kind of standards I will adhere to as governor. Patronage went way overboard. I think we have seen time and time again it has reduced dramatically the trust that people have in government. And if the citizens of this Commonwealth don't trust the leaders in government to do the right thing and hire the best people, that is a serious problem for the kind of civil society that we all hope to oversee and hope to lead.
I would say that good organizations, private sector organizations, they live by results. And I think the issue that would really clean up patronage is if the state government did the same. And certainly somebody managing the state government to results is not going to put up with hiring people that aren't qualified for positions, because you can't get the results. And ultimately that is what it's about. So patronage is a very big gray area, but when it results in hiring people that aren't competent for the position they're in, that's when there's a problem. That would never happen if there was a focus on results.
Attorney General, you have prosecuted John O'Brien at some point, unsuccessfully. Inherently evil? Is the system inherently evil?
Well, first of all, let's not mistake what's happening in the federal courthouse and those allegations about rigging tests, about making sure that people who were promoted by someone, these are the allegations at least, promoted by people allegedly for some quid pro quo, which is what the law requires in some respect. That is not what I think, and I think the treasurer talked about, a transparent, open process where people get interviewed. There's a process that's transparent, and we know that, at any level, people also should be opening up their records. I've called for, the legislator to be more open on both public records law and open meeting law. And I think that when the public doesn't understand or doesn't believe that the system is fair, in other words, that it's rigged, then they lose faith in it. It's also important, as we see down in the federal court, that when people are breaking the law, when it is so rigged that it becomes criminal, that's what those allegations about. And I would say one of the primary reasons that comes to light is from coverage. In the newspaper reports, and in this instance, there was a huge report done by the Supreme Court, the Paul Ware report, of course, that showed this. But systematic breaking of the law that is illegal undermines obviously the public's concern about it, and so we have to be above board.
Okay.
I agree.
Here, yes.
To pursue a progressive agenda, people have to be able to trust government, and the standards for public service have to be at the highest possible level of ethics. I think we all agree on that. We need to have faith in government so government can do what it needs to do for people.
So,
I mean, one of the stories that's lost in this, though, is of course this is a department, it's an agency related to the criminal justice system. And for those of us who want to push for reforms in the criminal justice system to make the criminal justice system work for our communities, it is shocking that this kind of corruption is happening in the very agency that is supposed to deal with how do you reform people, how do you reform the system, how do you get them back to the table. So it's, for me, this is an area that has to be not only pristine, but if we are actually going to be serious about treating criminals as criminals and those who deserve to have another shot fairly, this issue, I mean, we just have to clean out the system now.
But the good news is that it was investigated and the charges were brought, and so we've made those kinds of reforms in the system, and that is a change from 20 years ago or 30 years ago. There's a lot more transparency that's required and should be required around the way in which people are hired, the way they get their jobs, as well as every area.
And
of
this-
what we
this
do.
applies
We're
to
going to wrap up. We're going to wrap up on this question
Yes.
and move back to Julia Kayan
Okay.
with another question. And we'll give everybody a chance. If you want to refer back to it at another time, feel free to do so. Ms. Kayan, a few weeks ago, Somerville Mayor Joseph Curtatone issued an executive order ending the city's compliance with the Secure Communities program. It's a federal program that asks local law enforcement officials to detain individuals who have been arrested for up to 48 hours to determine if there are any immigration status violations. In Massachusetts, over half the people that have been deported through this act have not had criminal convictions. Do you support Mayor Curtatone's efforts? And if you were elected governor, would you make them a matter of statewide policy?
Yes, and I do. Look, I'm the daughter of a Lebanese immigrant family. I was on Obama's team for comprehensive immigration reform. I stood with President Deval Patrick when I was Homeland Security Advisor in New Bedford, pushing back. I remember that major raid that happened. This is not just personal for me, though. Anyone who is in public safety knows that communities have to have trust and faith in their law enforcement. Otherwise, they will not come forward, whether it's drugs or domestic violence or anything going on in their communities. We learned that after the 1960s and 1970s urban riots. We've learned it certainly with other threats, more recent threats like the War on Terror. So this is obvious to me. Secure communities is broken, and I know that from two roles. One is when I served the governor. He wanted to get out. There were some complications about the federal law and whether we could opt out or not. But internally at the Department of Homeland Security, the new secretary is actually doing a review of secure communities because mayors like Joe Curtatone or the former police commissioner Ed Davis are saying, this is madness. How can we get immigrant communities to feel invested in our future? And it's part of, so yes, and I would push with the president, if governor, for comprehensive immigration reform and to change secure communities. Look, and this is part of a bigger issue for the state. We have populations of people, of immigrants, some of them undocumented, and as governor, I feel I have no other option than to bring them to the table. I disagree with the Attorney General on driver's licenses. I think for public safety purposes, we need to have driver's licenses for undocumented. I am for in-state tuition. You have only two options as governor: bring everyone forward together or leave pools of people not able to move forward in our economy. So it's part of a bigger piece, but yes.
I commend Mayor Curtatone for what he's done. I think it's a terrific example. We now have the Trust Act before us in the Commonwealth, sponsor of which Jamie Eldridge, Senator Eldridge, is an endorser of my campaign. The Secure Communities Act is misnamed. It's insecure communities. It causes people to be frightened. And yes, people should have driver's license, in-state tuition. I've never met an illegal person, and I think helping people in the Commonwealth participate in the Commonwealth is an absolute key piece of social justice here.
But let's talk about why we had secure communities, and I agree that we need to review it. I'm glad Jay Johnson is looking at it. People should feel safe in their communities. I've worked in communities since I became assistant DA, and we worked very closely to make sure that with community policing, that our local chiefs and our victim witness advocates understood around domestic violence, around people, often the victims of people in their own communities, and threatened. Don't go forward, the police aren't your friends. And so we've worked really hard to gain the trust of people who are here, whatever their status. And the first reason that secure communities made sense was that for those predators, this was an effective way to to get them out of the country and remove that threat to often people in their own communities. Apparently, and we know that it's gone far too far, and that the evil person here, the bad guy in this, is the federal government. And I commend Joe Curtatone and I commend Ed Davis for saying, wait a minute, we signed up for something, it's now acting differently. We have to make sure in all of our communities that people feel safe, they feel secure, that they can come forward to police.
Go ahead, Joe.
I would just say that you know, our state became great by immigrants, by waves of immigrants that came here, became parts of our community, contributed mightily to our state, and that will be the case now going forward. It's just that the recent arrivals, and some of them undocumented, are suffering because of the inability of the federal government to clarify their status with immigration reform. So we need to embrace them as members of our community like every group of immigrants before them, and certainly there will be going forward. And to have them live in fear that being pulled over for a traffic stop could put them on the road to deportation is more like a police state than the welcoming state that became great on on the great work of immigrants before and will in the future. So I also commend Mayor Curtatone for what he's done, and believe that the Secure Communities Act will be changed by our own state law and probably by the federal look at it as well.
So I actually, being a Somerville business owner for 45 years, and Joe Curtatone is the mayor of Somerville, I called him as soon as I read about it, and I thanked him for it. I thanked him for his courage. I said, you may take some heat on this, Joe, but you're doing the right thing. You're doing the right thing because immigrants are the backbone of our society. So this is a critical issue. And there are differences around the table. I mean, the Attorney General was a cheerleader for the Secure Communities. I think the Secure Communities has been demonstrated to have been a blunt instrument. Now we find that, as you said, more than 50% of those who've been deported didn't have a criminal record. We do disagree around this table on the issue of driver's licenses, which I also agree is a public safety issue. Why would you want people driving in Massachusetts without driver's education, without driver's test, without insurance? Doesn't make any sense.
But you know,
One more, yeah, let's give the Attorney
I
General a
think
chance
we
to respond briefly.
Yeah, I don't think any of us disagree that people who are here should be treated fairly and they should be treated well. It's what we've done with people who have been victimized by big predatory corporations who come in and don't pay their wages. We have never looked at their status. We have looked at who is making them victims and who are the predators, and we've always acted in that sense. I think we all agree that the federal government hasn't done its job, and the states, not just Massachusetts, but other states, are going to have to step up.
Okay, let's switch to the first of our student questions. This is from Suffolk senior Anthony Mangini.
Suffolk University has a strong commuter student body with students often traveling from far distances in order to make classes. How do you feel you can improve public transportation for these students, such as myself, given that there is a constant threat of raising fare prices as well as stations constantly closing for repairs?
And we'll start with Dr. Berwick on this.
Yeah, well, this is a piece of the bigger issue of transportation in the Commonwealth. We're $15 billion behind in state of good repair. That gap has not yet been closed. There are parts of the Commonwealth where people can't get to and from work. We have the problem of finally getting South Coast Rail done. Our regional transit authorities are letting people down. This is a big issue of the needed investment that's been the can's been kicked down the road for students in particular, and for the UPass system, in which we really gives people in our colleges and universities a chance to move around the way they want. This is also good for the environment. I want to make Massachusetts the first carbon neutral state in the nation. I want to set us on a trajectory toward that, and that means developing better mass transit options. This is a matter of regional equity, closing income gaps, and doing smart development. Transportation, as Mayor Curtatone has shown with the Assembly Square project, is one of the hallmarks of proper investment in job growth and growth of communities and good housing. So I'm completely with your questioner.
And it is more than the Suffolk students, as much as we love them, John.
Any others?
It's really, no, it is
Good
important.
plug, good plug.
And they're able to get to school. Obviously, education's a huge issue, and one of the reasons our economy is so strong and will be strong is because of our kids and the investment in them. But it is, particularly within regions, we haven't, really kept up our transportation for the last 8 years. I mean, we are still digging out of this recession, I would argue caused by Wall Street investments, cutting in budgets that have let us not keep up our roads or bridges or make the investments we should, as Dr. Berwick said, in public transportation. And our economy, to move forward, has got to have that regional transportation. So people who live in Boston who work in Metro West, or people who are coming in to the new Innovation District can get in and out without crowding the city. And again, I totally agree with Don. making sure we align it with our climate change goals.
As governor, the investments we have to make in sort of Massachusetts' backbone are investments in people, students, and their learning, and then of course investments in transportation infrastructure, which I've done throughout my career in Homeland Security, about building resilient societies. And this is the only way that Massachusetts will be a global economy, will be able to compete with 49 other states who want those students and want them to live here. But it begins, or additional concerns, or how do we get more people off of any transportation, including making bike lanes safer and more accessible for these students, keeping the T open late because actually kids don't go to sleep before 2 a.m., walking, and a generation of new students who are turning 16 and buying a car is not the first thing on their mind. And we, as a governor, we can begin to adapt to a future generation of students who are going to live very differently, and that includes housing as well as transportation needs that are not related to cars or mass transit.
These days, candidates for governor don't go to bed before 2 a.m. either. I think if you want to be governor, and I think we'd all agree that the governor's plan, the way forward, is as good a model as any for the next 10 years. Some people would say $1.3 billion a year, round numbers. I think if you want to be governor, you got to tell people how we're going to pay for it. And the legislature made a down payment. It was a modest down payment, $600 million. They raised the cigarette tax by $1 a pack. They raised the gas tax. They decided to index it to inflation. I support that. And when Charlie Baker says, no, we don't want to index to inflation, I would challenge Charlie Baker to tell us, where on earth are you going to get the $1 billion that we would lose over the next 10 years?
By the way, where are all of you on the indexing, gas tax indexing?
I support it.
Show of hands, everybody?
No,
Everybody?
no, no,
Busy
I
doesn't
don't support
know.
it.
All right,
He
we've got,
doesn't.
okay.
So, I agree, we have a
Four?
huge, we have a huge backlog of infrastructure projects, and thanks to the big dig, so we can thank Charlie Baker and the Well administration and others for that. But now we are faced with the numbers roughly that Steve's talking about, and I agree with the gas tax that was raised to the national average of 27. And I agree that we will need more revenue, and we will probably, in my administration, go back and ask for more, and we'll make the case for more. But I would not support indexing. Indexing is a backdoor tax. It's what people resent. It's sleight of hand in the legislature, and I think if you're counting on it, you ought to start thinking about Plan B, because I think people will ultimately reject it. So I will, as governor, go back and ask for further increases, probably in the gas tax and other revenue sources. And I will make the case. That's what leadership is. What people don't like is escaping leadership and relying on a sleight of hand back of the envelope tax or backdoor tax that happened without their real knowledge.
But if
So just quickly, another show of hands for going back and asking for another tax increase for transportation. Specific, it sounded like that's where you were going.
No, where I was going very specifically is you take the $600 million that the legislature put out there, including the gas tax indexation. You have a transportation bond bill, which will be a piece of it, and then I have proposed that we take internet sales taxes, once they're approved by the House and signed by the President, and take $5 billion of that over the next 20 years, and that fills the hole. We can do this on revenue that we will be receiving in this Commonwealth. I'm not
So
proposing
internet sales tax.
So there's four
Yeah.
ways to get it, and so it's not true that we're not talking about how to pay for things. So you can save. So everyone wants to look at the state budget and see where we can save. Second, you can shift funds. So I've been a big proponent of changing our criminal justice system. $1 billion in prison construction by 2020. We can invest that in efforts that work and that help our society share. Public-private partnerships, especially in infrastructure. If you look at other states and other cities, they are sharing the burden, so to speak, in public-private infrastructure banks and public-private investments. And then, of course, what everyone wants, which is you surge the economy. How do you do that? How do we get growth? It's investments in people and, of course, investments in infrastructure. And that is the long-term way to move forward. We will have a debate about taxes because all of us are going to inherit a budget that will probably, that may not reflect job growth or economic growth. So I don't like it when Republicans take taxes off the table. It's no better when Democrats do. We have to be honest. We inherit a budget. We will be the governor, one of us, and we have to be honest about
Well,
what
let's
move
move on for a moment because And we can come back to taxes because we're always talking about money
We'll come back to taxes.
in one way or another.
We're gonna talk about that
Right. This may bring you back, and this
We
one,
death by taxes.
this one is for the Attorney General because it does involve money. What doesn't? Attorney General, you ruled a ballot question on repeal of the casino gaming law.
Yes, indeed.
Was not constitutionally suitable for the state ballot, a question that's now before the Supreme Judicial
Yes,
Court.
indeed.
In arguing before the SJC, your Assistant Attorney General, Peter Sachs, told the court that if repeal passes, the taxpayers could be forced to repay some of the money that the gaming industry has put out. If the SJC rules against you, repeal makes it to the ballot. First of all, how will you personally vote on that issue? And if it passes, how would you make up that difference in money?
Well, in the first instance, they're not going to rule against me. The Attorney General's office gets these ballot questions all the time. We make a determination based on facts and laws whether it's a suitable topic to go on the ballot. We knew that this one particularly would go up to the SJC no matter what we ruled. First impression, we knew that it was going to be something the court would have to decide. Whatever they decide, by the way, I'm happy with, and I'm glad they will make that decision. They're going to rule soon. I have said that if it's on the ballot, I personally will not vote to repeal it at this stage, although I have also said this kind of enterprise is not the first place I would have gone for economic development. And I have played the role, I think, as Attorney General during the creation of this, saying we need a money laundering statute. We need to, if we're going to do this, and the legislature voted to do this, if we're going to do this, we need to make sure. We know there will be people who have addiction issues. We know that it will cannibalize some of the other industries and businesses around casinos, and we need to provide for that. So if it goes on the ballot and it is repealed, we're going to have to look at where that money comes from.
So
I
who
think
thinks
there's a
it
good
should
risk that
go
we have
on
to
the
give it back.
ballot? Who thinks here it should go
But
on
can
the
I
ballot?
say something about this?
I want to
And
talk
who
about
would vote
casinos
to
first.
repeal?
I would vote to repeal. I think I'm the only candidate before you that is against casinos and for this repeal. And frankly, I do not understand why my colleagues are not joining me there. In the last poll that was just out the day before yesterday, what is it, 37% of Massachusetts voters now are in favor of casinos because they understand what's going on, the ones that are opposed to it. Casinos will cannibalize the lottery, that will not raise the revenue that intended. They'll add a mental health burden, which we're going to have to pay for. They'll add DUI and petty crime. They hurt small businesses. There's research now that shows that for every slot machine, there's one job lost in business. It's a bad deal for the state. And I think that the voters are now showing that they realize that, and it's time to backpedal. We do not need casinos in this state.
But
I'm
Dan,
very
you
much
were,
Can I say
Don, you
something
were
about
against
the-
it before when 60% of people
Right,
wanted
so
it, right?
I-
You're on
the
the
poll-
merit, so this
I
is
was
the
on the
issue.
merits and the
So
evidence.
can I just say
Right.
something though to the Attorney General? I mean, for when you go after banks or use the role of the Attorney General for something good, you always say, I did this, I did this. On this issue, it's we, my office. And I mean, this is a huge issue for the state, and that every single one of us has an opinion about whether it should be on the ballot. We can't hide behind the we of the office. I think it is very important that people know whether it should be on the ballot as governor. I think it should be on the ballot, not because of the polling, but because they satisfied what it takes to be on the ballot
the good
for a
news
casino.
is-
But then, to Don's
The
point,
good news is that neither Juliet nor I will make that decision.
right,
It's up to the Supreme Court.
But the opinion about whether your litigation stance is it, do you think your litigation stance is right? I mean, that's the question. But on Don's point, he doesn't understand why the rest of us aren't there. Look, this is a hard issue. I don't think it's the most progressive governor of our time accepted casinos because he looked around and saw 30 plus other states. And it's very difficult to generate revenue, and it is and in the absence of getting major tax reform, which he was unable to do. Some of us disagree with the repeal because we will inherit a budget that already has about $100 million in terms of revenue, and that will go to community colleges and education and public safety. We can disagree on the merits of that. But the idea that progressive or not progressive, I mean, I stand with Deval Patrick. This is hard. And at this stage, we have committed the state, and I would vote personally to keep the casino
This
on.
goes
Okay.
upon, that's
Okay.
based
Right,
upon,
right.
that's based upon revenue shortfall.
It's based upon a number
If it
of
were
issues.
revenue neutral, how would you vote?
Well, I mean, obviously, if I inherit a budget and I'm saying, why would I do this thing and it's not generating revenue? But let's just be clear. It's not like Massachusetts is out you know, in Never Neverland, 30 plus other states have looked at this, 30 other governors who are competing with us to be the best state, right? So that is one way to look at it. The other
actually,
is
they have
we
really good
have
revenue
we have
generators
a
for their
rigorous
states.
Let
we
me,
have a rigorous statute.
I don't
No,
think
want
this
to be
is
clear.
as hard as we're making it, to tell you the truth. We have a law. The law is crafted, it's been in place, and it allows for local control. I think we should let the law play
There's
out.
nothing local about a mental health burden that consumers are
No, let me
under.
come back to, actually the biggest impact is in the local areas, and that's what the law provides for, and people have been turning it, some areas have been turning it down, and I think that's the way the law was crafted, that's the way it works. What I don't like is referendum government. Having the idea, like California, that every time somebody doesn't like a law, they get a referendum, creates an incredibly unstable place to do businesses, grow businesses, plan, create jobs.
It's one of
and
the reasons
ultimately we have to
California's
create
broke,
jobs.
actually.
So you know, casinos, we can all have
All right,
opinions
let's-
about it, we have a law.
Let's let the
referendum government's bad.
treasurer weigh in on this,
Well,
just
look,
ever so briefly.
Well, I oversee the lottery, and the lottery is almost a $5 billion business that generates $1 billion in profits. The Mass Taxpayers Foundation did probably the most authoritative study, and they said it's going to create 15,000 jobs. And this is at a time when there were 250,000 people out of work. A lot of people have looked into the mirror and haven't seen a job, haven't seen themselves working full time in 3 or 4 years. So between the 15,000 jobs and $300 million of additional revenue, net of what the lottery would lose, much of that money coming from money that Massachusetts residents are spending at Foxwoods, Mohegan Sun, and Twin Rivers. So I did support it. And if it's on the ballot, if the Supreme Judicial Court puts it on the ballot, I'll vote to leave it on the ballot. I will not vote to repeal it.
I don't think that's leadership.
Okay.
I think leadership is declaring on the merits whether or not casinos belong in this state, and they do not. We have to add jobs. These jobs will be evanescent. They're not the kind of jobs we need in this Commonwealth, and we need leadership that says this is bad for the state.
But
let's stop
Joe
it.
is
leadership
right, though.
is
That's
driving,
statute lets
leadership
people
is
choose.
driving us forward to create jobs, and it's not the instability of repealing things and changing the landscape every year or two.
We can
that's
have
not
more
leadership.
jobs and no casinos.
It's time now for a question from another Suffolk University student. Let's hear a question from Suffolk University junior Taylor Cole.
How could you make safe and affordable housing accessible to college students?
This question goes to Joe Avalone.
Well, I've been as just aghast as everyone at the recent articles that have shown how poor student housing really is. I mean, I've been here for 40 years and I've known it's bad, but did any of us know it was this bad? This is an abomination. And I think certainly it's probably true in other parts of the state, but in Boston, I'm very pleased that Mayor Marty Walsh is really gearing up the inspection services and the like. And I think we should come down hard on these landlords. They know exactly what they're doing. And if there's any role the state can play to come down on them, I would do that as well. I also think the universities have got more of an obligation here. You know, whether it's
That's a
more
question
in
for John.
payment in lieu of taxes, sorry, John, or
take in-
or
he'll
other
take
things
in
that they
roommates.
need to do, maybe to support how we're going to assure that we have good affordable housing. I don't think they could just turn this over to the cities and say, good luck, you know, we can't really house most of our students. That's just not going to work for the long run, and we end up with what we've got. So the direct answer, I think, is to make sure we don't have the rat holes that some of these poor students are living in right now in Boston or any other of our cities where we have universities. And I think ask more of our universities in supporting the environment that they're in, especially if they can't house their students.
And it raises the bigger question about affordability, which is, I think, where we're both going. You know, tuition is one thing, fees add up. The package to send someone to Suffolk University is extensive. And even if people are getting financial aid or have to take out loans, the cost of that is expensive. And I'm guessing for that young woman asking that question, being able to come to Suffolk costs her more than she can afford right now. And she's going to graduate with debt. So there's the safety issue on housing, but it's part of a bigger package about how expensive higher education has become. So on the state level, we need to make sure it's affordable for our universities, our 2-year and 4-year schools. And I would throw out a challenge, actually, to all of our not-for-profit schools to look at how we can make it more affordable for everybody.
Seems to me the way you make housing more affordable is that you create more of it, more supply. We've got a huge supply-demand problem. We've been talking a lot about number of now new housing units we need to build. The state, Massport, the MBTA own vast amounts of public land. Take that land, put it out for a procurement process, and to say to a developer, if you're willing to put housing on that land, middle-income housing, housing that students and others can live in, and you're willing to do it, we will give you that land for 99 years for $1. But in return for that, we are going to require you to take that 30% that you just saved on the land acquisition cost and put it into lowering rents by the 30%. More housing will create more affordability for students, and colleges and universities at the same time have got to be in the position of building more housing for students on campus.
So I've worked in both state and federal government, and if we want to talk about, we're one state, many solutions. You cannot talk about Boston in the same breath as Bridgewater or New Bedford in terms of the needs of the mayors or Somerville. It all comes down to zoning. And the sort of restrictive 19th century zoning rules that we have in this state, owned by state government, that inhibit smart growth by local mayors and regional planners. And so one way a governor can help mayors and regional planners think about smart growth, which would include different levels of housing, is to release some of the inhibitions that exist that are owned by the State House and by state laws, and get a more modern zoning policy that lets a mayor, say in New Bedford, who's worried less about affordable housing in his inner city and actually wants different kinds of housing. He has plenty of affordable housing to increase his residential tax base.
We've got to add affordable housing. I've heard it all over the state, and it affects every community that I've been in, and not just students. I want to address one particular end of this, though, and that is homelessness in this state. 4,000 families homeless tonight. We have cut back on supports to just get people to have a roof over their head, which I think is a human right. Our state housing voucher program, which supplements Section 8, which has been stabilized, is now, it's less than half of what it was 6 years ago, and I wouldn't stand for that. We need to make sure that people in this Commonwealth have a roof over their head and get that housing voucher program back in business.
We do need affordable housing, but I can tell you, I have also heard from mayors around the Commonwealth, similar to what Juliet's saying, that they need more, let's call it middle housing, middle income housing, and there is no good formula for that. And that's the key for them to repopulate with the newer workforce that we're going to bring with the newer jobs into these gateway cities, our only way forward. And so we have to come up with formulas that will allow for development there. One is to shorten the time frame from which some of the affordable housing can flip to market rates. I know that sounds a little against affordable housing, but ultimately,
No, it is.
Mayors are talking about this because they know that then they can bring in the next level of people who are getting into the middle class, into their communities, and that is the future of creating opportunity for everybody.
I mean, if you look at the demographics of the state and the desires of our citizens, older people want to move back into cities, empty nesters, because they are sort of sick of the suburbs and the big houses and having to mow lawns. And young families like mine, youngish now, want to stay in cities. And so the demographics of the state are changing, and we have to get housing to reflect the different patterns of choice that are going to exist in the next 20, 30, 40 years in the state.
And
On
we
that,
are-
oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I just on that note, can we take a brief break, which I
course,
think we
yeah.
could all use? Remember, you can join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag MAGOV. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Why Suffolk?
Why?
Why Suffolk?
Why Suffolk?
Why?
Because in Boston, we don't just study history, we live it every day.
Every time I leave my res hall, every time I walk to class, every time I go to my internship. Because anytime I do anything at Suffolk, I'm right in the heart of Boston.
You know you can trust the Boston Herald to give you smart and straightforward content. We're dedicated to bringing you the best and latest in news, sports, politics, lifestyle, and commentary, any way you want it and any time you want it. We're with you in print and on the go. We take you to the scene with our video reports.
Hi, I'm Joe Battenfeld.
And I'm Hillary Chabot.
This is Steve Buckley at Fenway Park.
And bring you live coverage on our radio station. As a result, more people are choosing the Herald than ever before. So thank you, and make sure to check us out on bostonherald.com.
Welcome back to the Democratic gubernatorial debate, live here at Suffolk University. It's time now for our next question, and this goes to State Treasurer Steve Grossman. Treasurer Grossman, the Democratic State Convention will be held in just a few days.
Really?
Yes, you may have heard of that.
13%, right? 13%.
Many observers feel that you've put together an impressive amount of delegates, possibly enough to win the nomination at the convention. But this week's Boston Herald Suffolk University poll indicates that 51% of voters think that conventions are a waste of time and money, and 85% of people have never attended a convention. Given that, tell us just how important these conventions are in selecting the nominee for the Democratic Party. And before
Sure.
you get in here, also, do you think it's fair to perhaps exclude some of the people sitting at this table because they don't make the 15% vote on the first ballot?
Well, just to answer the second part of your question, that's up to the delegates. The delegates have been chosen in caucuses all over the state. Look, I'm a huge believer in grassroots organizing. From the time I got involved in politics back in the late 1960s until today, I've never lost my faith in the power of grassroots organizing to change communities. And no Democratic governor has been elected in 40 years, from Michael Dukakis to Deval Patrick, and I'll throw Elizabeth Warren in her Senate race, without a strong, passionate army of activists behind them. So even though you may only have 6,000 people in Worcester, there are tens of thousands of activists who have played a role. We were at an event last night in Lexington. Only a small fraction of those people will be at the convention, but there were 150 people in the backyard. They're engaged, they're involved. They believe that it matters, organizing and activism. So I'm proud of what we've achieved so far. I was on the phone on Sunday for 6 hours calling delegates. I don't take anything for granted, but I look forward to coming out of that convention with a lot of momentum. Action, passion, and an engaged electorate is what wins elections, and it's a message as well. So if you have the ideas and the organization to put those two together, that's how you become the next governor of Massachusetts.
Well, I would say conventions have a role. I mean, I've been here for 30 years. I've gone to many of our conventions, and the 15% rule for that part has been around for a long time. So conventions help energize the party, but I wouldn't equate that with grassroots organizing. That's a whole different thing. It's a small group of people that go to the convention, 6,000. We may have 1 million Democrats. It's going to take hundreds of thousands of activated people to win the election. So I think they're fine. They have a role. Often people that win the endorsement don't win the nominee, and often don't win the general election. So there's no real direct correlation with whoever wins the endorsement. What I have said is that I think it's unfortunate for the party this year because of a set of circumstances that they ought to watch out for in the future. We've in recent years turned to one ballot, and we have 5 pretty credible candidates. And so the math isn't really going to work very well to have 5 credible candidates actually survive this convention. I think that's too bad for the large group of Democrats that won't have a chance to vote for their candidate likely among us 5. And is that really good? So what I've said is I think it's unfortunate, and I think for the future they ought to think about the fact that if this kind of combination of events happens again, they ought to think about that. And maybe go back to 2 ballots, which was the way it always was before 4 or 5 years ago, where then most credible candidates got on. So I don't think the convention plays a role. I don't think it's a massive role, and unfortunately, if it has the effect of keeping a couple of good people off the ballot this year, I think that's unfortunate. We, as Democrats, should think about that for next time.
So,
I mean, I don't know, it's so inside baseball. I mean, the issues that got all of us into the race are so much bigger than 15.01%, but we're all focused on 15.01%. My personal feeling, obviously being a new candidate, is it would have been very difficult for me not to have a convention, because it gave me time to build grassroots support, to build a base, to get a variety of communities and people excited in terms of moving forward with my campaign, given just the nature of the 5 of us, 2 better known names, people who've been in politics a while. It's very hard to go in a primary, but look, this is one piece of many elections. And what is the most important thing that Democrats take out of all of this polling or take out of this process is we take nothing for granted. Especially with the state house runs. For 16 years, between 1990 and 2006, we took things for granted. This is a very dynamic state with strong progressive Democrats and more conservative Democrats and independents or unenrolled who make up the majority of the electorate. This is a fight. And the polling to me suggests we're going to have a fight. And that we should think that that's great.
It's been fun to be 5 altogether. I'll be missing people that don't make it on the ballot, but it's an open process. I've been all over the state. The delegate selection process involves many stakeholders. I just can't wait for this convention. The momentum I can feel is enormous. The surge of interest, the public is awake and watching, and the messages I'm bringing are being very well received. I think it's going to be a great convention.
And the great thing is, we've got people who've been to 20 conventions. A lot of people, it's their first convention.
Yes.
We get a lot of new people, young people who want to get engaged. I'm really excited. I know we all are to have young folks concerned about what government's going to do. And so this is an opportunity to get everybody excited about that for the primary and then for the general. It's really an organizing and a tool to
Hey, I'm
get
for the
everybody
convention too,
energized.
and I'm excited about it, and I'm going to get on the ballot. So I'm just talking about what we need to do in the future.
Yeah, my worry is that we're so busy looking at our belly buttons as Democrats that we're not looking at the bigger issue, which is, of course, Charlie Baker, for all of us.
And you'll have a chance to get to him in a few minutes.
Okay.
Right.
Oh, right,
Right.
he says, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's gonna be there.
It's kind of scary to think of.
But first we have a question from Twitter, and this is for Juliet Cayenne, from Mike Can Boston, okay, who asks, do you support legalizing all pot, as he put it?
So here's where I am on this issue, having admitted famously on Boston Herald TV, radio, maybe forgetting I was running for governor, that yes, I have smoked marijuana in my youth. So here's where I am quite seriously. I have always been for the decriminalization of marijuana, mostly as part of a criminal justice program. I know others have opposed it. It is, it's just where we need to be as a
Let
state.
me just clarify, a decriminalization of all?
Of marijuana, of all cannabis, right.
No matter the amount?
As long as it's, the law is written as long as it's not sale and distribution. I don't know the law, the exact law. So, okay, so that is one. The other is legalization. I am looking at Washington and Colorado. Washington, yes, and in terms of what they've done. Those states are very, very different in how they've approached this. I want to learn from them. This is where the fact I've been to 44 other states is relevant. We can learn from other states. One of the states, I'm forgetting which one, allows home growth, which seems like a very different thing. The other, highly regulated, out of storefronts. Both are actually generating a tax base that's going to go into the state revenue. But they're about 6 months old. So I'm more than happy to wait it out and review, because one of the big issues coming forward is the only reason why this is happening is because Attorney General Eric Holder essentially gave a wink and a nod and said, I won't prosecute in these states. There's a new president with a different Attorney General. All of this is somewhat moot.
And we have health issues. We've seen already some of these products that are being sold, they're not regulated. We've had accidents, we've had deaths as a result, and recently I think a couple of doctors were told they may lose their license if they prescribe. So there are issues, as Juliet's pointed out, because the federal and the state, once again, will make the federal government the one not making good decisions here.
Well,
but it is a wink and a nod. The Attorney General knows that. But it could change in a heartbeat.
We haven't been able to implement medical marijuana effectively here. That has been a fiasco. The citizens of Massachusetts said pretty overwhelmingly on a ballot question, medical marijuana is something we think is appropriate, properly controlled and properly disseminated and distributed. And the process has been absolutely mismanaged. So I'm not in favor of full decriminalization at this current moment. I would look at what Colorado and Washington does and study it, but where we are now is
nor would I. I agree with you, Steve, and I would say that with these dispensaries, when we do get them, I think we have to make them so they're very rigorous around the medical indications for which we know it really works. If it's just kind of a very loose thing, then essentially it's a back doorway into recreational marijuana. We're not ready for that as a state. There's an awful lot to learn from Washington and Colorado for years as to deal with. Just think of all the things you have to think about. Transportation, workplace, all the things you have to think about.
Let's be just clear with the medical uses on a doctor. We've seen, Joe and I have both seen patients who can't get relief from their nausea or their pain without marijuana. So we have to make sure that we're a compassionate state and get that done right. But waiting for the evidence from Colorado and Washington makes sense to me also.
So nobody would decriminalize now?
No, well, there's a difference. It already is decriminalized.
It is
So it's
decriminalized.
legalizing
Legalizing.
the tax base. Yeah, no, not right now.
Full legalization.
I think
Right.
Okay, good. Okay, time for another student question, this time from Suffolk University junior Lauren Berube.
Many white students are now feeling at a disadvantage, while minority students with the same qualifications are given priority in college admissions decisions. Is it time to revisit affirmative action laws?
This question goes to Don Berwick.
We need to stick with affirmative action. We are still a country in which inequalities of all types plague us, and they follow racial and ethnic and social lines. And no, social justice is absolutely key. We need to make sure that there are remedies that work across the board to get communities of color, minority populations, and people at the low end of the income spectrum back into the mainstream. So I'm for affirmative policies that allow us to help people get back into the mainstream. And by the way, that doesn't just cut across racial lines. There are plenty of people white people in this Commonwealth that are suffering a lot from lack of advantages. We need to reach out and make sure they have advantages as well.
I think we have to continue to build bridges along the lines of affirmative action, but get more proactive. One of the great things that I found this summer in a lot of our inner cities is one right here in Boston, the Building Pathways program, which helps communities of color, for the most part, move along into apprenticeships and on into the unions, which historically have been very white. And I think those kinds of programs are ladders up that we absolutely need. If you spend time in these gateway cities and in the communities of color, there is very little going on there for opportunity, and we have got to do more to bring them up.
But that's
I
what
was just gonna say, I think what's concerning is this young woman feels that she's not being treated fairly. And so it brings us to the issue of how we talk about the need to get diverse communities in jobs and housing, how we talk particularly in Massachusetts about the need to include people and how we do that. Because unless we do that, we're not going to accomplish what Don has said, and I think we agree we should be going there. The court has narrowed some of what we can do, but still says that you can take into account the societal goals at the state level, at the educational level of accomplishing that. And when there is a young woman who feels that she's not being treated fairly, we're not doing our job of explaining why diversity and inclusion is important and it should be a
But
societal
you can
goal.
use government to achieve these goals. And again, I have a track record on this issue. When I stood up the day I was sworn in, I said, and hiring a treasury will reflect the diversity of the society in which we live, and we'll hire the best people. 35% of the people we've hired have been from diverse communities. When I took a look at small businesses, and I said, small businesses owned by women, people of color, immigrants, and veterans are not getting access to capital. It's an unequal, unlevel playing field. There are no quotas in the program, but we poured money into small banks that in turn have made loans to businesses owned by women, immigrants, and people of color, and it has created jobs and entrepreneurship among diverse communities all over the state. So you can play a leadership role in government, whether your role is treasurer or whether your role is governor. Governor has more tools, and that's why I'm excited to be the next governor.
Well, I've actually spent the first part of my career as a civil rights attorney, breaking down barriers, institutional barriers, including at schools, universities, and related to minorities and communities of color as well as women. So this is a role that government has to take on aggressively because there are still institutional barriers, and we need to look at them and we need to make sure that everyone has access. But the question I found depressing because in this day and age that a obviously talented white woman would feel that her opportunities are limited because we want a diverse and open society. It means that we have not made the case. Those of us who understand what diversity means understand that the state and our schools need to reflect what the world looks like. And so part of the response is I would love to have a cup of coffee with her and explain it.
I think there are myths that are in our culture that we've got to fight, and that's a win-lose myth, that for some people to succeed, others have to suffer, or the other way around. I don't believe it. The name of the problem here is poverty. It's poverty. 34% of Latinos in Massachusetts are below the federal poverty line. I think it's 29% for African Americans. This is not a state that should live with or tolerate those kinds of inequities. And if I'm governor, front and center to my agenda for this Commonwealth would be the end of poverty in the Commonwealth.
It's not just
Just
poverty,
briefly
though.
to
It's
the
not just
Attorney
poverty.
General. The Treasurer raised an issue about office staff. Do you have similar figures for your office staff and how you've implemented a diverse workforce?
Very proud of our figures around our paralegals, our lawyers, the staff that we have in our office. I don't have the figures
You don't have
on
numbers?
the top of my head. We have them. I'll get them to you because we follow, as the treasurer does, the policy of making sure that we advertise, that we recruit, and we look to have our office be the face of what Massachusetts is. It's important that every constitutional officer, indeed, I would like to see private sector
But
start to
briefly,
look at that.
around the table, when it comes to affirmative action at universities, how many still think affirmative action has a place in the college setting? Show of hands?
It does, but it's
I mean,
also
just
been
how it's
broadened.
applied,
It's more on
yeah.
the basis of income and beyond race.
It's not
And
quotas. It's
I mean, governors, you have to comport with the Supreme Court of the United States. If a law is made or an interpretation is made, we have to live within that and interpret those rules in a way that is legal but still preserves that kind of diversity that we all believe is important to a just and humane society.
Okay, thank you.
But I think I think that going back to poverty is a a goal, obviously a laudable goal, but it's not a plan. And the plan is jobs, and jobs and opportunity is what the next governor really has to focus on.
All right, well, I'm sorry, we're gonna have to go to a,
Okay.
we're up for another Twitter question. Okay, this is from Twitter user Norso, who asks, is it time to plug the welfare leakage and Governor Patrick's $25 million fraud problem? How would you do it? And this is, we're going to start with Attorney
Why
General.
did I know that question was coming? And I welcome it, because we have focused in our office exactly on making sure that while people should get the benefits that they are entitled to and that we want, we don't want kids going hungry, we don't want people homeless, we need to make sure that we provide for those folks in our Commonwealth who need that help. We need to also make sure that there isn't fraud around that, and we've gone after, for instance, the convenience store owners that were involved in EBT issues, and we continue to, with Suzanne Bump, who does a great job in auditing, and our Inspector General in our office, to bring cases and investigations when it's appropriate to look at it. And so I've been committed to that. I'm really proud of our budget. For every dollar I get from the legislature, I bring back $10. And we focus on the fact that tax dollars are limited. We know where we want them to go. We want them to go to education. We want them to go to to children who are hungry. And so we've been very focused on making sure that that's what happens here.
Democrats have to have good ideas like social services, DCF, welfare, but also have to be good at implementing them. We should be more angry than the other side, than Norsu, or whatever, hashtag Norsu or username Norsu, because we believe in these programs and we understand that DCF or welfare or food services or health care matter to people. But the bigger issue is the delivery of social services and state government is being done on 20th century technology. One of the focuses of my administration is to deliver services, important social services, so that I can answer the question as governor, how many veterans have committed suicide? How many people have died of heroin? Why can't I answer these questions? It's because we do not have 21st century state government. We need to think about the future, and that begins with technology, making investments in it, but also being able to interpret it so it guides public services, it guides public funds in a way that matters to people.
I think it goes beyond technology. I think it goes to a management culture in the state government. And we haven't had a manager of large organizations as governor for a long time. And I think it shows. And the recent recession has exposed a lot of weaknesses. We've had some difficult management failures, which I don't put at the feet of Governor Patrick. He wasn't a large manager either, but it goes back significantly beyond that. And the failures are exposing a lot of weaknesses. Yes, data is part of it, but it's the accountable management culture. I think the next governor ought to have run large organizations, know how to get results out of large organizations. That's actually what I bring.
Well, there was quite a bit of controversy over simply putting a photograph on an EBT card. Is that something that you approve of, Dr. Berwick?
I started and ran and grew an organization from nothing to $40 million size, global scale. I ran the largest agency in federal government by budget, 5,500 employees. I know what diligent management looks like, and fighting fraud is absolutely part of that.
There was actually a question on the table.
I understand that. I want to make sure that if we take the steps, which we have to take as leaders, to make sure that fraud is minimized, that we're not hurting the vast majority of people who are being honest, and in the case of outreach and social services.
Does an EBT card with a photograph
No.
hurt
No on
that?
the picture.
No.
No, here's what
I disagreed with the legislature when they said there should be pictures on the EBT cards. Look, I oversaw the procurement for the new technology for the Department of Transitional Assistance. And I said I wouldn't sign off on it until it helped us deal using technology with waste, fraud, and abuse. But we cannot look at the 800,000 people in the state who are sitting here at this moment on food stamps and scapegoat those 800,000 people. This is about compassion, and this is about the kind of social justice.
We have to understand that.
I am against
fraud
this
a serious
picture.
problem?
Fraud is a problem,
It is a problem.
but let's just
It is a
like
problem.
separate the issues. Fraud is a problem. Does anyone actually think a picture is going to stop fraud? we have driver's licenses that people are fraudulent with. It has not. The picture is a red herring, red meat
Well, the legislature
for
did.
people.
They
Right.
thought, they thought a picture would help. Mitt Romney said it wouldn't work. Mitt Romney, it's the only thing I've ever agreed with Mitt Romney on.
Fraud has to do with systems that can cross-reference data, figure out whether you standing before me is actually you. That's not just a picture. And because of the privacy implications, because of the stigma issues, I am against a picture.
Technology is the answer, it's not a picture.
You have to understand the fragility of people who are at risk in this Commonwealth. I'm not for fraud. I fought it hard at Medicare and Medicaid. Hundreds of billions of dollars were at stake, and I have no patience with fraud, but we must not put barriers in the face of compassion, getting help to people that need help. And adding bureaucracy, adding hurdles is going to hurt people who are already hurting too much. We need to reach out to them. I'll fight fraud as hard as anyone will, but I will not put people who are at risk at further disadvantage.
I don't think the answer is more bureaucracy, absolutely not. But I also applaud the audits. I think we should continue to do the audits, and I applaud what Suzanne bumped in. And the answer is technology. Look what people know about us from our phones. I mean, honest to God, they know where we are, when we're there, what we're doing. And that's for marketing purposes. Obviously, we could know who's doing what with the EBT, and I think it's a matter of technology.
I oversee 7,400 lottery agents, and if a lottery agent is buying and selling cards illegally, they're going to lose their license that fast.
And we modernized information systems at Medicare and Medicaid when I was there.
Let's
we were
move on
using
because we have a very important person, a
at
Suffolk University student. Here's another student question from Suffolk University junior Joe Presti.
What could be done to help make the repayment of student loan debt reasonable and affordable?
This question goes to Joe Avalone.
Well, it's a great question because it's a huge burden for the next generation and for any of us also trying to finance the education for the next generation. So the first thing is to keep tuition affordable in our state and community college system. And I'm certainly dedicated to doing that because it is such a fundamental way that we're going to create the opportunity and the jobs that are going to be there as our state and community college system and even our vocational schools. Those are the people that are going to have the new work skills, attract the new businesses, and that's how we're going to all succeed in our Commonwealth. So we have to keep it affordable. I agree with the idea of making sure it's budgeted at least half of the true cost. That usually keeps it in range, and it hasn't been done for years until the last 2 years. I also believe that what I'm going to do is ask for a cost efficiency and improvement plan every year from every campus before that budget process even starts, so that we know going in that they're doing everything they can to try and look to the future and use innovation to keep these costs down. And then the final thing is, at the state level, what I would like to do is use loan forgiveness as a way to encourage students into key professions that we know we absolutely need in our state. And it might be teaching, it may be a couple of other things, even in healthcare, because I think this has got a great payoff for us. Finally, I think let's all support Senator Elizabeth Warren's bill in the federal government, because a lot of the student loan interest rates are going to be affected by that, and I think her new bill can certainly add to the solution here.
And I bet he taped that before the president made his announcement. So that's good news, because some of that has to be, and I'm glad to see, I agree with Joe that Senator Warren's been on this for a long time. It's part of the problem. Kids are graduating with just too much debt in a tough job market. Being able to ease that and then look at ways, I agree with Joe, looking at some loan forgiveness and making the cost itself, but the cost of the cost.
Whenever, I've got to say something about an 800-pound gorilla here, and that is about affordability, whether it's transport or housing or student support to students, and that's healthcare. Healthcare has got to change in this Commonwealth. It's got to become more affordable. Ask any business owner, ask the university finance people, they'll tell you the rising costs of healthcare are eating us alive, and any governor in that corner office is going to have a plan for reducing healthcare costs dramatically in this state. I know there are studies showing that 30% of healthcare is pure waste. I did one of those studies, and I know what it's like in this Commonwealth. And one of the best ways to do that is to have a simplified payment system. That means Medicare for all, single-payer health care.
I don't remember that one being on the table either. Right, is there anyone else who'd actually like to talk about student loan debt?
I think the last thing is obviously loan forgiveness for particular jobs, public safety, National Guard, public health, those that would help our society grow, and then also just the long-term issue. All of us have different focuses in terms of our campaign, but one way to relieve debt is to have job growth in this state, and so that these students who are prepared for the job market that is a Massachusetts job market. We can't talk about jobs generically. What are the jobs that are coming here and staying in Massachusetts? How do I, as governor, lure them here, get them here, compete with New York and Connecticut, so that what students are learning is we don't have a skills gap, is tied to the jobs that will be jobs that stay here and grow this
And
economy.
it helps they can stay on their parents'
Right.
insurance until they're
If you want to
26.
tie in, if you want to tie in healthcare,
So,
and with
very
with
quick-
all due deference to my moderating colleague, one of the solutions, of course, is to keep tuitions low or lower.
Sorry,
That's
Well,
that's something
that's a
that
perfect
actually.
segue, because I have said publicly, and I support at our 29 public colleges and universities, freezing fees and tuitions over the next 4 years. There's a cost to doing it. You don't propose something as governor or as a candidate unless you can tell people how you're going to pay for it. But freezing fees and tuitions when our students are drowning in debt is one thing. And the other thing is, and this is the inherent principle behind Elizabeth Warren's effort, why should the federal government be making billions and tens of billions of dollars of money on the backs of our students? Something that's
There's no
revenue
good
neutral,
reason.
fine. But the federal government should not be making an enormous profit on the backs of our students who are drowning in debt. Fundamental principle.
How do you pay for the cost freeze of tuition at state universities?
Look at the state budget. Look at the state budget. In 10 years, every item has gone down, whether it's parks and recreation down 25%, or local aid down 40%, or support to higher education down 30%. That money's gone to healthcare. It is not unrelated. It is related. 59% increase in healthcare costs in this state. On the public side, on a $14 billion base, that is hundreds of millions of dollars we've got to recover, and that's one of the key sources of potential support for doing things like
I'm
reducing
the only
tuition.
person that's actually controlled healthcare costs in Massachusetts, and I know there's an enormous opportunity to create an enormous amount of room in our budget to invest in things like education and the things that we know we need to invest in.
4 ways to
without
afford the
raising
things we
taxes.
want to invest in. You grow the economy and you grow revenues through growth. I mean, I've said we can grow 75 to 100,000 jobs a year. We did 55,000 last year. We can do better. Savings within government, I've done it at Treasury. We can do it. Healthcare is one area. Criminal justice system is another area. Public-private partnerships, we have to rely on the business community and challenge the business community more. That's why I've said the business community has to be our partner in creating 5,000 summer internships so that our students have paid internships, not summer internships.
Well, so,
A
so,
good,
I mean,
a
this
good-
is-
I'm sorry, a
Good
good way to
segue.
wrap it up.
Okay.
A wrap up and go to break. We will take time for another break. We'll have more of the Boston Herald Suffolk University Democratic gubernatorial debate when we get back. Please stay tuned.
You know you can trust the Boston Herald to give you smart and straightforward content. We're dedicated to bringing you the best and latest in news, sports, politics, lifestyle, and commentary, any way you want it and any time you want it. We're with you in print and on the go. We take you to the scene with our video reports
Hi, I'm Joe Battenfeld.
And I'm Hillary Chabot.
This is Steve Buckley at Fenway Park.
and bring you live coverage on our radio station. As a result, more people are choosing the Herald than ever before. So thank you, and make sure to check us out on bostonherald.com. Why Suffolk?
Why?
Why Suffolk?
Why Suffolk?
Why?
Because in Boston, we don't just study history, we live it every day.
Every time I leave my res hall, every time I walk to class, every time I go to my internship. Because anytime I do anything at Suffolk, I'm right in the heart of Boston.
Welcome back. In this segment of the debate, we're going to do something a little bit different. We'll be taking questions from the independent and Republican gubernatorial candidates. And we start with a question from independent candidate Jeff McCormick.
At a recent Chamber of Commerce event, all of the other candidates agreed with me that the #1 priority of the next gubernatorial candidate is to create jobs in small businesses throughout the Commonwealth. My question is, what experience do you have in creating jobs with small businesses, and what kind of policies do we need going forward to help the Commonwealth to do that?
So for this one, we're going to start with State Treasurer Steve Grossman and just go around the table and try to get a response from each candidate.
Okay.
Treasurer Grossman.
So I'll be fairly quick. Look, I spent 35 years of my life running a successful small business. and that successful small business created jobs. And we did it by respecting the people who worked in our company, by offering people superior service and quality and value and professionalism. Because I had run a small business over the years, when I was running, I had roundtable discussions with small business owners all over the state, and I asked one question: what are the roadblocks and barriers you face, and how can we in government help remove or lower those roadblocks? And it was access to capital, it was permitting and regulation, it was the cost of health insurance, it was lack of technical assistance. I focused on access to capital because I thought that was something I could actually do. Took money from banks that were overseas, brought it home, competitive interest rates, and we have been a catalyst, at least, for over 8,000 loans, over $1.3 billion of lending. So small businesses need permitting and regulation to be dealt with. Cost of health insurance has to go down. We need to give more technical assistance to small business owners who need that help. How do you do a cash flow statement, a marketing plan? And you need access to capital. If we can do that in government and expand those programs, we'll have dynamic small business growth such as we have not seen in generations.
Julie Kahn.
I've spent most of my career in public service, and Jeff's question, while important, sort of assumes that government doesn't have a role, or good government actually doesn't have a role in job creation. It does, and we all know that. First, as a civil rights attorney, someone pushing for access and greater access for people, small businesses are started by women and minorities and immigrants. It is about people having access to education and a seat at the table. And that's why I'm very strong on veterans issues and other groups of people that are creative, that will start small businesses in their communities, but may need just skills training, workforce development, mental health care because of the wars. The second is on jobs. You can't grow an economy without a strong commitment to the resiliency of who we are as Massachusetts. So my career in investments in communications, infrastructure, transportation, port growth, because we have a global maritime economy here. That's how you create jobs. So there is a role for the private sector, but don't assume those of us who have spent careers in public service don't have a role in it either. Good government has a role in job growth.
Don Berwick.
Well, I created a business from scratch. I didn't inherit it. I started in 25 years ago, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, with a tiny seedling grant. It grew to one of the largest organizations in the world that works on health and healthcare improvement and community improvement. 140 employees. We never laid off a single one of them, even during the Great Recession. I used modern quality management methods, which I would bring to the corner office. When I ran Medicare and Medicaid, I did something else that's very relevant to what I want to do as governor. I went to the industries that are regulated, that are paid for by Medicare and Medicaid, hospitals, doctors. I said, what are we doing that's stupid? Give me I call them stupid regs. And they gave me long lists of what they thought were stupid regs. I brought them to my staff and said, what are we doing that's dumb, that's in the way of business? I asked for 50. They brought me 80. And we eventually became the lead agency for the President's initiative on simplification when we issued a reg that took away 100 regulations and saved $1 billion. That kind of thinking about simplification is not at all inconsistent with a bold progressive agenda, and I certainly would make it front and center.
Attorney General.
So I want to thank Jeff for that question, and we were all there then. I know Charlie Baker was not at that.
He's coming. He's coming.
No, he wasn't at the seminar that
Yeah.
Jeff was talking about, because he said we all agreed about small business. It wasn't at our educational forum on Saturday either. And so Saturday, I'm in Somerville, and I was talking to a woman at a farmer's market. She had been a lawyer in Washington, had worked for the federal government, decided she wanted to do something different, so she opened her own shop in Cambridge, and she was selling some great treats. And I said, how is it? How's it going? She said, there's too much paperwork. It's too hard. I'm a lawyer, and I'm still going through mountains of paperwork. And not only her experience, but what I've heard on the trail, what I've seen from our Business Technology Economic Development Division, there's too much people have to sort through. So it is about capital, as Steve said, but I'd like to have a governor's office where you can go at least start with one place that'll say, if you're going to open a business, this is what you need from the state, and then coordinate it with our municipalities. That is where a lot of our job growth will come from. Small businesses, women-owned businesses, minority-owned business haven't had the chance to build that equity before for a lot of reasons, but we need to, and we're going to depend on that. So we should be friendly to those small businesses and get every barrier, every opportunity to get them started and growing their employees.
Mr. Evelyn.
I've created thousands of jobs over a long career, but 2 of them and 2 episodes, 2 chapters, were in startups. So I've run 2 startups, one from employee 1 to 100, one from employee 1 to 40. So I know what it takes to build a business in our Commonwealth. And Jeff, virtual Jeff, is great. Good to see you, Jeff. Is right about it. The creating jobs, especially in small businesses, is fundamental. I have a plan. It's on my website, Jobs and Economic Development. But one big part of it has to do with having a real plan to deal with small businesses. So I'm proposing a series of innovation centers around our state, most in the gateway cities primarily, which do what we know that successful incubators can do for both Main Street businesses and small tech businesses. They do have single one-stop shop permitting. They do have shared space. Excuse me. They do have business mentorship that allows people to write sustainable operating plans, et cetera. And I think by doing this, by making it real, we can actually get small businesses to form in these inner cities, these gateway cities, which we have to do, or we're not going to be able to bring them back.
All right. Now we're going to pick up the pace, we hope, just a little bit, with a lightning round based on questions from the two Republican candidates, Mark Fisher and Charlie Baker. We know you've been waiting a while for this.
Well, we all agreed to, and we all agreed to it. So give us some credit.
This is
we
true.
all were,
we saw Mark Fisher on
yeah.
So
I guess Charlie invited Mark this time. So.
But they're back to back, as you will soon see. Mark Fisher and Charlie Baker.
I've heard you all say that Massachusetts is on the right track, but the doubling of food stamp recipients, the tripling of EBT costs, and making Massachusetts a sanctuary state, I don't think it's the right track. It's bad enough we're Taxachusetts. Do we have to become Detroitachusetts?
Given the DCF, Health Connector, medicinal marijuana, and probation scandals, just to name a few, do you think state government in Massachusetts is heading in the right direction? And if you don't think it's heading in the right direction, what would you propose to do differently than the Patrick administration?
So if you'll allow me to paraphrase for just a moment. State government, right track, wrong track. Let's see, this first goes to
Julia.
Me?
Yes.
Okay, so I've worked in the state government. I've worked in the executive branch, so I know the challenges on day one. I started
right
day
track,
one.
wrong track.
So
yes or no?
Well, these are questions. Absolutely right track, but there are problems. Who ever lived in a world in which there weren't problems? I mean, they're acting as if under Republican governors there weren't systemic administrative problems, but I will fix it. As I said before, technology matters because the delivery of services and how we implement our great ideas matters to Democrats because otherwise people lose confidence in it. We can't just be good on ideas. So
we'll get back to
We'll
get back to the topics. Right track.
We're going to stick with some of the issues that were
Right-
mentioned here in this video.
Right
Dawn-
track, wrong track.
I'm proud to be
Dr.
here. The first state to make healthcare a human right, best energy policy in the nation, first state with marriage equality. This is a great state to be in. I can't wait to lead it. We're doing well.
Attorney
Do we have
General,
problems? Of course we
Attorney-
do. The biggest problem remains inequity, inequality, and poverty in the state. We have to fight it.
We'll get back to those. Attorney General Coakley, right track, wrong track.
Totally right track. I get to work with attorneys general around the country. They're sick of hearing me say how great our education is, how our growth is, what we've been able to do here. Challenge Dome, I agree with that. We did it in the Attorney General's office. And when you look at the map of the United States and you see where Republicans dominate, governors, legislatures, they have a high poverty level. They don't have good education. They don't have good job growth. And so, Mark's question is.
Thank you. Right track, right track, right track, wrong track.
We're on the right track. Governor Patrick had the right vision. Since 2005, we've gone through a terrible recession and an uneven recovery, and I think we continue on this vision, but we bring new tools, better management to the next generation.
Right track, wrong track.
Right track, but we've got to acknowledge when we're not doing things well and fix them. I mean, DCF, the social workers have 18, 20, 22 cases. That's wrong. We've got to fix that. The connector is a disaster. It could cost us over $200 million. When the governor put out a no-bid contract on the next vendor, I said no. There will be no big no-bid contracts under Governor Grossman. So we've got to fix those things. And it's about managerial excellence and leadership.
Let's stick with that. Let's do the.
Charlie Baker spoke to the issue of medical marijuana. Probably, I think he was speaking about the rollout.
Contracting, yeah.
Talk about that, Dawn Berwick.
The
Handled
rollout,
well.
not the rolling.
Very good.
That's the rollout.
Handled well, not handled well.
Not handled well. We have a series of management failures. Let this not undercut our faith in government's ultimate ability to really help people that need help, but these are management problems. One of the things that I want to bring to that corner office is my management experience. 30 years as an executive, growing organization, running a large federal agency, totally devoted to modern principles of quality management. These are failures. The public should be upset about them, and we need to not let them happen. And if you're a progressive, you need to care about that, because a progressive agenda depends on government executing things properly.
Just on the marijuana or on everything?
Yes. On marijuana, we'll get back to the other topics.
Total disaster. I've said that publicly. I think, look at the care we put into assembling the Gaming Commission, for instance, and the vetting we did of all those applicants. We are embarking on something we've never done before with a drug that's still illegal under federal law, that impacts public safety, it impacts money, it impacts, and we have not done it right.
It's very disappointing. Nobody would seriously go create a process that we just went through and have so-called finalists not vetted completely and then have to back up. So it's essentially starting over, and it would never happen in the private sector. It should never happen in the state government.
Steve Gross.
No, I think I addressed most of this issue in terms of some of the things he mentioned. But in addition, we've got other problems that are begging and crying out to be fixed. I mean, Bridgewater. I mean, if the next governor doesn't take Bridgewater from top to bottom and pull that apart in terms of mental health, behavioral health, and criminal justice, and figure out how people can engage in activities and get away with it, Bridgewater cries out for the next governor to show some leadership.
Medical marijuana rollout.
Obviously, it's been a mistake, and it could be better, but people will learn this about me as a Canadian governor. You don't panic, you fix it. And these questions are sort of red meat questions about, isn't it all horrible? Look, things, you fix it, and you learn lessons, and you do the reviews, and then you make it better, because that's the obligation of the next governor.
Well, we're going to stick with the red meat. Because, this is still the Boston Herald, and that's what we do. Attorney General Coakley, Department of Children and Families. How do we fix it?
I believe we can fix it. And I've said publicly, since not just this crisis with poor Jeremiah Oliver, but I've worked with DSS, then in DCF, for 25 years. I knew back in the 90s that we had people with too many caseloads, not enough training, too much of a difficult situation. In a nutshell, we have an agency whose mandate is keep families together and keep children safe. And I believe they're often at odds. And it is impossible in many circumstances to go in as someone with too much work to do in a very tough situation, figure out what you do. And as every commissioner under Democratic and Republican governors has said, we make two mistakes. We take kids out and we leave them in. And if we have a protective division within the child, within DCF that says we're going to protect kids, then we will get that mission, not perfectly, but we'll do it much better.
Dr. Evelyn,
DCF,
please.
Yes, well, let's start with what we're dealing with. This is one of the most vulnerable populations, in this case young children, that the state would have responsibility for. So we have to make sure that we have a department that can absolutely stand the test to make sure that no child could ever suffer the fate of that poor child in Fitchburg. And so in order to do that, we have the study. We know we have to remake the whole department, and absolutely from top to bottom, and including new management. The thing that I would add to that formula, which we have to do, is I would have that commission reporting directly to me as the governor until I am sure that that department is up to the task that it really has to carry out.
DCF,
look,
Treasurer
accountability top to bottom. I mean, I probably didn't sit well with the occupant of the office on the third floor, but I said when Olga Roche offered her resignation, I would have accepted her resignation, because the people of Massachusetts had lost faith and trust in DCF. 36,000 kids. And yes, the circumstances in which these children and families are is very, very vulnerable with substance abuse and domestic violence, but it's got to be about the safety of every child, accountability top to bottom, and let's implement that reform agenda from the Child Welfare League. We know what it is, let's implement it.
Juliet,
So we all obviously failed Jeremiah, because the caseworkers at DCF have the hardest jobs I could ever imagine. So I've spent a career cutting across barriers, 351 cities and towns, state and federal agencies, not working in specific units. And if you look at what happened at DCF and to Jeremiah, this was an issue about information. The school, the neighbors, the church, DCF, the police department, all had information. And the caseworker knocks on the door and has access to barely any of it. So when I talk about technology, it's not a be-all, end-all, but the second recommendation of the outside report, besides more resources, It was those resources for caseworkers go to technology so that an iPad can actually let the caseworker know standing at the door, you know what, the police department got called yesterday from this house. That's how we make 21st century social services deliver for children like Jeremiah.
Dr. Berwick.
You know, pediatrician, father, your heart has to go out to these afflicted kids and families. But blame isn't going to get us there. This is a failure of leadership and investment. I met a DCF caseworker an evening last month. His caseload should be 12. It was 19. What do you expect? This is investing in justice, equality, and the well-being of our population. And we dropped the ball on that as a Commonwealth. And I won't stand for that. We've got to make the investments. It's also a matter of executive management. You can't lose touch with your workforce. An executive who begins to blame the workforce doesn't understand what's going on. They haven't created the circumstances for success, and my executive style is completely about involvement. Finally, if you read the DCF report, it was interesting that there were different agencies involved that weren't sharing information, as Juliet said. For example, the caseworkers didn't know what was happening on the health side, and they couldn't make the compensations needed. You've got to build a team, and teamwork at the top is absolutely essential to proper executive leadership. That was a management failure and would not happen on my watch.
Okay, the last quick issue, Health Connector. Frustration, cost, was it handled well? Very quickly, where do we go from here with it?
Well, first of all, we had a website that worked for the 7 years for the universal healthcare system that we have in Massachusetts. It was trying to superimpose the new federal requirements on it that created the problems. I think we should have a permanent exemption from those requirements. I think we already have a system that's got everybody insured. We already got the outcome. So it was botched. It was botched because of trying to create the integrations with the federal government, and obviously we should have had better contractor, better oversight. I've led big IT implementations. There's no reason for that.
Steve Grossman.
Well, I think I've addressed that earlier, and I'll just say it again. When the original vendor, CGI, clearly proved inadequate, we moved on. But the administration decided, because it was an emergency, to issue a no-bid contract. I don't think there should be big no-bid contracts in government. Protecting every dollar of taxpayers' money and fiscal responsibility are two key ingredients of what a governor should be all about. So this is going to cost us an enormous amount of money, and there's no guarantees. And Connecticut, right around the corner,
Ms. Cunningham seems to be agreeing with you.
Yes, no, I mean, look, no one's going to defend what happened with the connector. I mean, obviously, it's a $100 million more loss. But the question is, what do you do now? So obviously, you have to commit the resources to fix the connector. You have redundancies in the system, which I applaud the governor for, in terms of making sure this doesn't happen again. You focus on, for healthcare purposes, on cost reduction and public health issues, because that is going to be what faces the next governor. But right now, you fix the website, because as I say again, Democrats can have good ideas. If we don't implement well, people lose faith in those good ideas.
Tom Berwick.
It was a management failure. It is also a consequence of insane complexity in the healthcare payment system. And I go back to single-payer healthcare, Medicare for all. I'm the only one of us absolutely committed to introducing single-payer healthcare for sure in this Commonwealth. We need it. It will simplify things for patients, families, doctors, all of us, and save hundreds of millions of dollars. We need to go there. That wouldn't have happened if we had single-payer care.
Attorney General.
I'm not
it
sure
would
of
have.
that.
Single payer also has computers.
Yeah, but the
problems.
interfaces. Look, I ran this. I ran Medicare. The interfaces had to be.
Last word, Attorney General
Okay, I'll be
Coakley.
quick. Disaster, we have to fix it. I can't imagine how stressful it is for families worried about whether their child who has cancer is covered or whether someone who has asthma is going to be able to get their medication. It's just a disaster. We have to fix it.
That is all we have time for today, honestly. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. The Democratic Convention is Saturday, where we will find out who will be moving on.
And don't forget to vote on Tuesday, September 9th. Until then, have a great afternoon.